Thank you very much, Dave, and thank you for your extremely patient listening, and our apologies that we went on for a little bit more than the 45 minutes that I threatened. No, we did okay, and it was mostly my fault. So now, if it's okay with you, it's actually over to you. A couple of things to say. We don't have a roving mic, so you'll need to speak up when you ask a question or make a comment or tell your story. It would be ever so helpful if you were able to say who you were and if you were representing any group in particular. But given that we've already complained about the surveillance society, you're perfectly at liberty to remain entirely anonymous in your comments. So we've had our say. It's up to you. Who'd like to start? Fire away.
Okay, I'm Anthony Day. I write the Sustainable Futures Report. Just at the very beginning, you passed a comment about we shouldn't break the law in order to protest, should we? And you just sort of said, you didn't really give a straight answer to that. Would you like to expand on that point?
Hang on, who are you asking?
Well, I thought you made the point.
I made the point. You heard the question at the back. This is that question about whether it can ever be right to break the law as part of a protest. And I suppose I was being a little provocative, really, knowing a bit about Heather's story. But you do, I think, have to just hold on to the idea very, very carefully before you decide to break it, that the law is there for a reason and the law is there by consensus. So to break the law lightly is actually a dangerous precedent to set, because if you're willing to do that, then those who have opposing views to yours might well say, well, it's legitimate for me to too. So I suppose the question I was raising is, in what circumstances, whereabouts would the lines be drawn between sticking to the law and saying, no, here is an occasion on which I have to break it? Heather?
Yes, well, I would say, going back to the Nuremberg principle, is sometimes the law in a country is wrong and it's not an excuse. So if you pursue doing something that is basically wrong, you are still responsible for that. And to allow Ryedale or anywhere in the UK to become contaminated, damaged by corporate power, I actually think we have a responsibility, and we have a responsibility to hold our governments to account. So if the government doesn't listen to us, then I also think we have a responsibility to take some kind of action, which is, what I did. And going back to the Catholic 9, who said burning paper is preferable to burning children.
Anybody any more comments on that? At the back.
I'd like to applaud that.
Okay, thank you. We'll applaud that. Thank you. And the gentleman at the very back.
Yeah, my name's Terry Doyle. I live on Teesside and I'm involved with various things up there. In terms of climate change now, for instance, I saw a brilliant advert or a cartoon in, I think it was the Eye, about a month ago. And when the school children started to strike on the Fridays, anyway, I heard a lot of patronising from the politicians, which basically, in my ears anyway, was saying, they're their kids, train that you're interested, but you really should be back in school, shouldn't you? And there was a great cartoon that kind of reflected that, and there was a picture of a politician pontificating on some rostrum, and there was some children, school children with banners about climate change, submerged in water. And the politician was pointing his finger saying, "There then, children, you should be back at school." So for me, there's got to be, we've got to listen to what are the consequences of my actions. Yeah, we've got to take personal responsibility, and we shouldn't go into any civil unrest or disobedience without kind of really examining what's going on. But at the end of the day, when we look at the facts that are being presented to us, and even from people like David Attenborough, who's he's a national treasure. He's not a politician. He hasn't got an axe to grind with anybody. We should listen, and I think when we listen, we'll be prompted by our own inner wisdom, and we'll act accordingly. So I personally think there are times when we've got to get up off our backsides, we've got to come out of our comfort zone, and we've got to speak truth to power. And I'm hearing a lot of that, and I'm really heartened. I'm glad I'm here. Thank you.
I think we're really heartened that you're here too.
Otherwise we'd be by ourselves.
and just before we take the guy there, can Heather just respond to that? Because this thing that you say about getting up off our backsides and taking responsibility is something that really ties in with your idea about fundamentally what resistance is and what resistance entails. Just talk us through that, and then we'll come back to you at that.
Well, firstly, I think it's excellent that children are getting involved because, just looking around here, most of us have got grey hair. And if you have grey hair, it means that, you're not worried about keeping a job. So people in the middle have got concerns about keeping a job. But we're talking about the future for children. So I think for children to be waking up to the idea of protest and to claiming, their rights is really something very, very valuable. What I would say on the other issue of resistance is that, we need to start asking critical questions. So if we go along with the current of mainstream media, of what the governments tell us, what the governments tell us leads us into war. So I think it's really essential that all of us step out of that current and start looking at what is going on around us, looking at evidence and making our own decisions on that. So yes, I'm 100% for, to me resistance is stepping outside of that current and keeping our minds sovereign.
I would just like to point out, as I imagine lots of other people in the audience, that my hair is silver, not grey. Guy in the back corner.
Hello. So I have sort of feeling about the law, and you were talking about the law a couple of minutes ago. And it seems to me there's sort of some very fundamental principles of justice which lie underneath the law, and then there's this big superstructure which has been built up rather higgledy-piggledy over the centuries, which tells you you can do this, you can do that, you can't do that, you can do that, etc. And if you transgress that, then you're going to be put up in front of the beacon and something will happen. But that's all been in a world where things have been generally pretty stable, slowly evolving, and all of a sudden they're hit with this situation where things are changing really rapidly, whether it be ecosystem destruction or climate change, and perhaps that whole superstructure becomes somewhat irrelevant, or at least things start to go wrong with it, whereas the fundamental principles remain applicable and should just be applied in a different kind of way. And some of the protests that people are doing is a sort of way of trying to get politicians and the law to think about that and try to start adjusting it to fit present circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting point. But it does raise this desperate challenge as to who it is who decides the point at which it's okay only to stick to the principle and not to stick to that bizarre superstructure of application that's been built up over the years. Do you have any thoughts about that and how it might work?
Well, in America,
Sorry, no, keep
in
going.
America, there's the youth versus the United States, which is basically saying that the government has got to take climate change based on into account in order to look after the future of the following generations, very near following generations. And there was a very interesting judgment by a judge in Oregon who, first of all, started to look at this case before it came higher and higher through the court system. And this judge said, well, actually, although the founding fathers said nothing in the Constitution about taking care of the environment falling apart, because of course nobody could perceive that that would ever happen. Nevertheless, there are fundamental principles which underlie the law, which mean that we now have to consider that, and it's part of the law in the US that has to be taken into account, even though it's not written in the Constitution. So it's something even more fundamental than the Constitution which should be thought about. And we have that here. We don't have a Constitution, but we still have that same very fundamental things that we have to look at and think about. And our judiciary don't want to do that. I'm very, very reluctant to go there.
Yeah.
And the protest is probably a very good way of pushing them to do that.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting to see the spectrum of society that is becoming increasingly involved in the notion of protest? Sorry, yes, fire away.
Yeah, well, it would be easier to respect the law if we felt we were all equal before them. But as it's at the end of the day not up to us who gets prosecuted, but up to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and even at times up to the police if they're prepared to take things further. I mean, no banker has yet been in any way prosecuted for what happened in 2008. There seems to be a rule that a young man under the age of 26 will be prosecuted if there's an accusation of rape. So if there are these differences in who does get prosecuted and who doesn't, why should I have any respect for a law that I might feel is a wrong law and therefore I could with impunity break it? I have broken laws in the past to do with protest and that sort of thing. And one example, somebody touched on what has the British government done to help. Well, bugger all, frankly. I was told when I rang up, because my husband was there, that they'd been told not to go. At that point, they were in Egypt. There was no rule from the Foreign Office that British people should not go to Egypt. In fact, at that time, there were thousands of British tourists in Egypt. When I pointed this out, I was told that they shouldn't have gone to that bit of Egypt. And I said, well, when did that rule come out? Yesterday. And actually, they'd been there for a while. And then it got worse, because when they had to get back from Gaza to Egypt, and they were effectively detained in the airport, again, no consular representation, although the Malaysian consul was there, the Turkish consul was there. It wasn't, it's again power. It wasn't until one of the business people who'd been on the Bradfield ambulance had his MP's private phone number in his phone, and he rang the private number of the MP, who then got onto the Foreign Office, who finally sent somebody to the airport. So again, it's not equality before the law, it's who you know and who can put pressure on.
Well, I would also say there's a difference. I would say there is a difference between statutory law, international law, and what we understand as law. We understand law as meaning justice, but actually statutory law relates to the rules of law. So the rules of law don't necessarily represent justice. And judges will say, oh, well, I can't make a moral decision, a just decision on this. I can only follow the rules. So what we're talking about is not breaking, the philosophy of justice. We're talking about the rules. And sometimes, and the rules change. And there are different rules internationally, just as there are within, what about Hitler and his rules? he determined certain things were against the law. So law is, kind of a nebulous thing. And yes, I think our government, Julian Assange, is that law to arrest a publisher for revealing the truth? So we've got to a situation where someone who speaks the truth, who writes about the truth, is prosecuted, who reveals a crime, and those who commit the crime, whether it be fracking or whatever they're doing, are okay. So I think there is a big question about what exactly is law and how do we respond to what is happening.
Yes, I'll come to you. I'll come to you next, and then Dave, you want to make a point too. So yes, the lady with the glasses.
Can I just ask, you said on your post that we play on democracy. What in your world would you say is democracy, and have you ever had it?
Actually, I agree. I don't think we have democracy. It's a belief in what democracy might be. But yes, I don't think there's been democracy for a long, long time. But yes, I don't know how. It's a complicated question because I agree we do not have democracy, and I wonder, have we ever really had democracy?
You raised it as a question. Do you have a view on it?
I think a lot of it's got to do with prejudice, just environment that we grow up in, like I said before, the media, and I think we really need to go back to basics and just connect with each other as human beings.
Yes, it's a lovely thought, isn't it? That the challenge is that in itself doesn't have leadership to do it. It's something we all have to do. I was interested in Heather's idea of these kind of connections that you make, and good people gravitate towards good people. And let's hope that somehow those connections are made. I'm sure we'll come back to that point. If you take thanks.
Yeah, I just want a couple of points. Firstly, this question about rights. It's worth remembering that one of the really good things that did come out at the end of the Second World War was the United Nations declaration of a limited number, but a number of very important universal rights of the individual. And I think we often need to come back to those basic rights when we ask the question whether we should be challenging different things. Because it's interesting, sometimes you get surprising legal decisions, in a good surprising way, that you'll find that a judge will say, somebody, for example, I think of a case not so long ago where a group of people broke into an armaments factory in southern England because they argued that the arms were being used to oppress the Palestinian people, and in fact were being used, I think, in illegal settlements. And the judge, they broke in and broke up a lot of the property in there, but they argued that that was actually justified by the universal right principle, and the judge agreed with them. So it's worth remembering we've got that aspect that we can, maybe should use more than we've done. And the second thing, I think, though, is the difficulty in our modern society of knowing what the facts are. And it's becoming more difficult. I'll give you one example, actually, one you kindly, in a sense, quoted earlier on, which was the story about the aid in Gaza. Well, as you may see from my T-shirt, I was on this convoy. It was Happy and Palestine Free with Heather.
There's the report, and the headline: Galloway charity may have delivered no aid despite £1 million of donations.
Exactly, reading out the headline: no aid. Right? I can't speak about the charity, what happened to the money. It wasn't involved in that. Viva Palestine was essentially a campaign to get aid to the people of Gaza that were suffering. That's why we did it. And I can tell you for a fact that we go into great trouble to deliver at least 18 fully equipped British ambulances to the people of Gaza, full of medical supplies. And we also delivered a lot of other things too. And we made particular, because we were aware of the difficulty of who should we give the aid to, we arranged this with Mona Farah, the head of the Red Crescent, the equivalent of the Red Cross in Gaza, and we personally made sure she took that aid. Now, I don't think we could have been any clearer about, firstly, that we were supplying that aid, and secondly, where we gave it. But that article is therefore a complete lie. And what I'm really upset about is that The Guardian, which I've read and supported for many years, should actually publish that rubbish. But it's one example of the difficulty, because 99% of the people reading that article, because they won't know, I'm not criticising the people, will believe it. And there's an example of the way the poison can spread.
Thank you, yes.
I was going to ask about how to protest, how to resist, and that just made me think about it. One very effective way is to be writing letters to our press, to the Guardian, I imagine you'll be sending one, and to our local press. Because at least there is a voice being heard, and it's, I think it would be an authentic voice.
I think that's a good point, and we'll come back to perhaps how we manage to use the mainstream media to our advantage, and how we use other available media to get our messages across. But before we come back to that, Dave wanted to make a point.
Yes, with regards to this idea of breaking or challenging or pushing the law, in an ideal world, and lots of people probably still believe, that our governments are there to represent the people and to create law which brings about a fair and just world. But I would argue that history tells us that on so many occasions it's the people pushing against the law for change that bring about law that makes it a more just and fair world. Yes. When many of us were involved at the gates at Kirby Misperton, we took great heart, at least I did, and I know others did as well, that it was 100 years after the suffragettes and what they did in terms of pushing against the law that eventually brought about something which we now, as well as considering them heroes or heroines, people now believe that is right, and that was a right direction to go. But it was a direction that was brought about by people pressure. There are lots of other examples. You could say the laws on homosexuality were brought about, as they currently stand, by people who knew and felt that was wrong. And in my lifetime, I've seen the attitudes towards that issue change dramatically. And coming back finally to the fracking issues at Kirby Misperton, many people were arrested at the gates, and I would argue spuriously, really. The policemen were using spurious reasons for carting people off into vans. They were most often, taken to the police station, given a cup of tea, and released soon after, without charge, most of them. It was a way of removing people from the protest. But it was important that people, and we did it in a very peaceful way, because we all believe totally in peaceful protest. But it was important that we did that in order to, I believe, what's happened now is we've spread awareness, not just at Kirby Misperton, but all of the anti-fracking groups across the country. They've spread awareness to a level far beyond what it was 5 years ago when we started. And so I think it's important that, whether you break the law, people did break the law theoretically by being on the highway when the police told them not to be. I think it's a fine line, and I think sometimes it's necessary, just to black and white say, oh no, the law is sacrosanct and you must challenge or break it. It's been broken and challenged over history to bring about a better world.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point. At the front, yes, please.
I just wanted to say two things. One was, with all respect to somebody who spoke at the back about climate, I'd heartily recommend you looking up Piers Corbyn talking about climate and the changes that are going on and some of the reasons behind it. And if you look at Greta Thunberg's background and her mother's role, that may surprise you as well. the fact that the government is encouraging Extinction Rebellion to get on with the job that they seem to be doing quite well, which is to spread opinion. And I think you'll be surprised at the background of that particular narrative. So yes, it's very hard to know what's going on behind all of these things, and I totally appreciate that we are all the product of what we have read and encountered, so we'll all have different views. But I think, as Piers Corbett, he's Jeremy's brother, is a meteorologist, he's got a lot to say about the view of climate change that is mainstream. So that's worth...
Singularly uninformed, actually. Singularly uninformed.
Yeah, people
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
people say that 93% of scientists
Just about every scientist who really knows what they're talking about knows that what he's saying is complete nonsense.
yeah, so there's obviously a good debate going on there.
Sorry for this, it's not really
Okay, for some people it isn't clearly. And the other thing I'll just add here, I'm in great respect of what people are saying about the law, but isn't a law in place to keep the corporatocracy going? And the thought that we shouldn't be thinking about how to break it. I mean, what are we about to have put in place? 5G, which is microwave radiation, massively ramping up the electronic smog that we already live in. Already 4G is said by some to be reducing pollinators by massive numbers. So every time we take our mobile technology with us, that's a transmitter. So, if we're thinking about keeping the law, I mean, I don't have any compunction to think.
I thank you very much. I think it'd be interesting for the two gentlemen at the back and you to perhaps get together afterwards and chat that first one through in more detail. Seconds away, round one. Yes, please.
I just wanted to say about both the weather manipulation and geoengineering, which is on a global scale, done without our consent and done as far as possible in secret to serve agendas, I'm sure, and weather weapons. Anti-human technology, very widespread across the globe, and it keys into our climate and our weather and the experiences we're having now. It seems to be a very false kind of days that we're having, very false weather, very strange times.
And do you think that this is being engineered?
Yeah, it is, without a doubt. And I do agree with every word you said. Especially about Piers Corbett, he's right on that.
He has different views about geoengineering, actually. So
He's fantastic.
Good. Yes, please.
Going back to protest, I think you made a very important point about the narrative and how things become normalised. And I think that's something that we saw very much at the gates at KM8, that many of us had never stood up and protested before. Some of you in the room will have heard me say that I complained at Marks and Spencer's, but I've never protested about anything else. And so I think that the world view very often, what you're brought up with, what you're taught, is turned on its head. And I'd be interested in Heather's view on at what point did that happen for you?
I would say that being in Hong Kong and what was happening to the Vietnamese asylum seekers, working on Freedom magazine with dissidents, with writers, poets, kind of gave me a different view of the world, and that cynicism, that view was expanded as soon as I became involved in Palestine, because if you go to Palestine or you start looking at the issues, it's like the doors are flung wide open. And I certainly feel that what we're told is almost the opposite of what is true. So in all the wars, the Iraq war, the disinformation, the lies, So normalising wars against civilians, all of this is just becoming, it's like, oh well, it's what we do, it's what human beings do, whereas actually this isn't human nature at all. And I don't think it's human nature to destroy our environment. It's not our nature to destroy people. But you talk about normalisation, and that is kind of how we're drifting along, as if this is normal, because survival of the fittest or whatever. Whereas actually, I would say what is normal is for societies to cooperate with each other and not to do any of these things. And in which case we have a justice system that is based on justice. To me, some of it now is quite simple, but it feels like it's all been thrown up in the air and turned upside down. So, we're having to find our way through and figure out what is true, what is not true.
Can we take one more point and then we must let Heather sum up?
I've got a question to either of you really. We had a point made earlier about democracy, and it seems to me that what we have in the UK is democracy, is a form of democracy, but it's a dysfunctional democracy. And the word democracy has been corrupted and misused by different governments worldwide since time immemorial, since Plato and Aristotle. But my question is, faced with the potential and actual manipulation of big data and the corruption of information and the messages that are delivered as part of what we might call the democratic process, really what hope is there for an effective and functioning democracy when politicians and campaigners are so able to manipulate data and manipulate information, whether it's through Facebook, whether it's through Google, or whether it's through any of the other big tech companies? The intrusion of data manipulation into the democratic process, for me, is one of the biggest threats that we see to this thing that we like to kid ourselves is significant in giving power to the people, so that people are represented when we go and put an X in a box every 5 years.
Heather.
Yeah, well, I would agree. I mean, putting your tick in a box is really meaningless, because what are the choices? If we had real choices, then maybe putting your tick in the box would count. But we don't. And also politicians make promises. They know what we want. The government knows what we want, but they also know what they want and what they're going to do. And so they take that mandate as if they were the sovereign people, whereas actually it is us. So the fact that we elect them doesn't hand over that sovereignty to them. It is still ours. And I would say that unless we claim that back, or claim it for the first time, because I'm not sure.
Well, we never have elected.
Exactly. So I don't know where.
Minority government. We've always had minority governments. They normally get in with about 38-42% of the national vote.
Yeah. So how do we get an authentic system that does represent us, and maybe a consensus system? Maybe democracy doesn't work. Maybe we need to be looking at something else.
But I'm concerned about the data manipulation element, actually, as well.
Does anybody in the audience have a view on that? I mean, I don't know where I'd start. It's such a challenging issue relating to technologies I don't quite understand, and suddenly I do feel grey-haired rather than silver-haired. But we have somebody with an answer.
I was just looking at what Boris seems to have got away with. Because they've all said it wasn't true, and nobody's allowed to prosecute them.
This is
very odd.
Yeah, yes.
I don't quite understand that, but that's law in action, isn't it?
Yeah, this is the case of Boris's 350 million claim being challenged as misfeasance in public office, and him now being told that he won't face prosecution.
So it's okay for him today.
Yeah, I find this one quite a difficult one. I'm conscious. Are you okay still talking? I'm conscious that some people have been drifting away, and I always worry that we'll end up with just two people arguing here, and the rest of you will have slid off without putting a donation in the box. When you know, like people do like people do with buskers when they slide off just before the busker's finished his act, so that they don't have to pay. Yes, what interested me, I'll come to you in a second, I'm just saying what interested me about this is that of course, it is slightly alarming if our would-be politicians are held to account by the law rather than being properly held to account by the opposition and, I would say, by the media. And I think it's a dangerous precedent to find ourselves in a situation where a politician makes a claim, in this case, admittedly, an outrageous claim that he knew was wrong and kept repeating, and that we then have to rely on a legal system that we've already said we're a bit uneasy about, dealing with it, because the scope for corruption in that setup is quite terrifying. We need a media that every time Boris appears on television, somebody says, before you answer this question, I want you to tell me what you meant when you said £350 million a week and whether you knew it was true. He needs to be called out by the media, and that possibly isn't happening. At the back.
Yeah, I think I'd come back on that and I'd say, picking up the point about democracy, we do have minority governments in this country, and that's because of the voting system. And if you want to change that, you change the voting system. So you go to some form of proportional representation or something which reflects more accurately perhaps the views of more people. And that's the way to do it. And I'd really, really question anyone who said that they wanted a political system that wasn't democracy and that we should try something else. I do have an issue with that. More fundamentally, the reason I put my hand up is completely we have to disagree with the idea that there is anything wrong with relying on the law to fetter government. That's what it's for, and that's the good thing about Britain. That's the thing that works in Britain, that judges hold the government to account. Right. As it happens, I work in an area which involves refugees, dealing with exactly those issues which Harry's been speaking about. And in that arena, it's the judges who make the decisions which grant people refugee status, and it's very much the law that is safeguarding the people. And that is a massive strength of Britain. It's the rule of law that protects everybody.
Thank you. I find that reassuring. Thanks very much for that comment. If you're happy to keep going on, we will, if anybody has any more points they want to raise. And we'll give it another 10 minutes. If you've had enough, I have two hands up now. So 2 people haven't had enough. I'll come to you in a moment. Guy with the beard.
I'd firstly just like to introduce myself. My name is Mahmood. I'm from Easy Walk Secondary School and I'm 16 years old. That excuse my nerves a little bit. I've not really done this before. I'm on the student voice team and we've tried a lot to try and put into our school recycling and sustainability and things like that. And I think if we take our school and then we take the government and try and make it like a sort of scaled down version, the school has let people go to the protests and they've let people go to different events in Leeds or in York, and I did go to one of them, kind of, I guess, but the issue with that is they let you go and they say, oh, good for you, yeah, we support you young people and things like that. But then afterwards we've asked for recycling bins, we've asked for help with our bee garden, and they've given us no help. I've written a letter to BIFA, which are the waste contractors, to try and get bins that we were promised for recycling, and they've not done that. And I feel like sometimes young people were applauded for our courageousness and our willingness to protest or bring points about, but I don't think that politicians take us seriously enough. I've been part of when we wrote a letter to Kevin Hollandray with 393 signatures, I think, in the school, asking to take climate change more seriously. But again, he just said, "Oh, that's nice," basically. So I just think that, yeah, it's quite hard for us when a lot of us also don't. A lot of the people that I talk to don't actually know what they're talking about as well. They'll get involved with these protests and they won't even understand where the causes of climate change are from. The agricultural industry, for example, contributes to 51% of greenhouse emissions, and yet nobody's prepared to go vegan or vegetarian for that. And I think that a lot of people just jump on protests like it's a trend, and we should try and make people more educated first before they start protesting. Yeah, I believe in peaceful protests, and I think that that's probably the best way to go about it for the majority of people, but there's no point in going to protest if they don't know what they're protesting for and they have no alternatives for either. Would you like to add?
I agree. I think information and critical thinking comes first. As I said about stepping out of this current of disinformation, that we need to be looking at the issues, exploring the issues, and that includes the young people, because the government aren't going to do it. The government are very much in a relationship with corporations. So whatever the corporate view is, and that includes the mainstream media, that is where the government are going to be. So it is up to us, and it's up to us to become informed, so that if we protest about something, we know exactly what we're protesting about. So yes, for me, resistance really is stepping out of that current and finding out information and searching for it from many, many sources, because information is something that gradually has to be built up, because there's no one source of information. It's looking at the total picture and forming our own view on that, which may or vary, as we've already seen tonight. There are variations on what people think, but what's important is that we claim our own minds, claim our own thoughts, and that's especially so for children, because it is your future. I've got less of a future likely than what you have. So I think it's great that kids are becoming involved, and I encourage you with that.
Yeah, and I can absolutely share your frustration that you get lots of warm words of support, and then when it comes to actually people taking action, they disappear into the mist. And I think you just have to keep battling and keep pressuring. But great work. Sorry, I'll come to you in a sec. Jane, you had a point to make.
Well, I didn't know whether you were finishing at that point, so I was going to abandon what I was...
No, as long as you're going to keep talking, we'll keep talking.
I haven't heard a lot of dissent here, so I'm thinking, and I've been really impressed with the contributions. People are already educated and have a confidence about protest. Now, I didn't have that years ago, and I was very, very busy bringing a family up. It was day-to-day survival. So now, it was the Iraq War that involved me, that actually got me from the sofa onto the street. I've forgotten the point I was going to make. I wanted people, if there were other people that were at that stage that I was at, if there are people here at a point of sort of low confidence and naivety about everything, what would you advise people to take away with them from tonight? How can we move forward with legitimate protest and actually be empowered?
Okay, well, I would say at the back of the room, I have printed out some alternative news sources. So there's about 5 of them where it's from journalists, and I've put a list of journalists as well, of people like John Pilger, who've been around for 50 years telling stories, telling the truth. So there's a credibility there. So I would say just scan the mainstream media, and that includes BBC, just to see what they're saying. but look for your sources of information from a whole variety of sources. So I have left information as to where people can start looking at things, and the wider you have, the wider vision you have of information, the more informed your choices are going to be of what you think, and it's that wider vision. And for me, it was working with the editors and then going to Palestine and seeing the truth. I mean, just like I can read that article and know immediately it's a lie. So you sort of developed a more critical view of things from wide sources. So that's what I would recommend: is everybody, look as wide you can to get information, and then process it with your own mind. Don't be told what to think. Work it out, what you believe.
Let's take one final one. Oh, sorry, we'll take two. One and then two and three. All right.
I just wanted to say to the young man that stood up, brilliant, well done, keep pushing. But it alarms me when I hear that young people are becoming, or anybody actually, becoming involved in protest naively. And it's really important that people take that personal responsibility to know your rights, because then you can resist in an informed manner. Because if you don't know what's being said to you, is it right, is it wrong, you can't challenge it. So I think that's really important. That's all.
Yeah, excellent advice. It's that thing about being well armed with well thought through information. Yeah, fire away. Yeah, please.
It was just that point about democracy. I mean, there has been a lot of consensus, which is good, but I would like to challenge something. I think it's dangerous to be too flippant about we never had perfect democracy and we haven't had perfect democracy and we never will have perfect democracy. That doesn't devalue the principles of democracy, which after I think a very long struggle with people, I would argue is the least worst option of all. And it's something to cherish, actually, because if you look at if you want a very efficient society, driven ruthlessly forward, creating extra wealth in doing so, all sorts of things like that, but having very little actual individual freedom, then go and ask the Chinese to help. But if you actually want something which is much less tidy by definition, because it's the product of the collective and therefore untidy will of the people, democracy is where, and I believe that's where we have to work. Of course, we'll never make it right, so we have to keep looking at it, and we have to come back to the point of even challenging the democracy. That's a healthy thing to do, which I come back to the point that protest, as long as it is within certain parameters that we described, is a very healthy thing. A democracy without protest is not much of a democracy. And I think in many ways the French, I think, are a better example of this than the British. They have, my God, they have protests, don't they? But they are a democracy, and they make their point strongly, and perhaps, dare I say this to an English audience, we have something to learn from the French, I think.
No, you're a brave man. You're a brave man. And really, there was something... Oh, sorry, go on. Just let Heather respond, and then it's your turn.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's suggesting we go towards a dictatorship. When I was talking about democracy, either making democracy right or looking at, there have been other ideas about consensus government. And I would say that one of the first steps of making democracy right is to get rid of lobby groups. Individual lobby groups, so that a lobbyist is one person with one vote, not, or 100 people has the opinion of 100 people, but not a corporation that has £1 million or something, because lobbying now is about money. So the loudest voices are the ones with the money. So that is the system we live under, that we have to change. So number one, get rid of lobbyists, corporate lobbyists.
And finally,
my only comment for this young man is that children can't vote, unfortunately, and they've let them keep their principle. If they, I applaud them what they do, and I feel sorry for them, but they can't actually have a vote, and that's why they're not taken seriously.
But I think that's a good thing because, as I said before, we have so many people that don't know what they're talking about, don't know what they're protesting for. So if you did give them a vote, I don't think.
I think you and we have a responsibility to inform. I'm getting concerned that you've been hugely patient. I'm pleased that you've overrun just as much as we overran, so we can feel a little less guilty about it. Before we wind up, can I just remind you that it is ideally a fundraising event, so if you're able to leave a small something for Frat Free Ryedale, we'd really appreciate that. Don't forget that Heather's books are at the back of the room and she's happy for you to take them. There are very few copies, but please, if you take them, make a donation. Remember to leave your email details if you want Heather to forward a copy of the paper on which our discussion was based. On that note, sorry, Dave.
I was conscious of my timing coming in here. Have you actually concluded what you wanted to say?
Very nearly, yes. Yes, no, I have. Yeah.
Well, perhaps I'll say it now anyway. I just wanted to say, on behalf of Frat Free Ryedale, and I'm sure everyone here, a big thank you to both of you, especially Heather, for a remarkable evening.